I think it takes zeal to finish writing a book. This is nothing I ever set out to do. I wanted to get that story out to people more than I was self-conscious about my writing ability or finding a publisher or being going on too long or anything else. So I would say the most important thing is, do you really want to write this book? If so, go do it.
Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artist makers and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. I'd love to invite you to stop by dailycreativehabit.com. I have created all sorts of resources for you because I truly believe that when you create, we all win. So I want to see as many of you stepping into your creativity fully, closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I want to help you do that. So I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I've written a book, Make Fun a Habit. I have all sorts of free resources like this podcast and a Facebook group called Daily Creative Habit. Also, the paid membership for Daily Creative Habit, where we get together with like-minded creators, all pushing in the same direction, encouraging each other, and saying we're going to show up every single day to create something to get our work out there into the world. So if you would like to be a part of any of those things, again, stop by dailycreativehabit.com or simply visit my website, which is mikebrennan.me. Hey friends, every so often I share about this concept of mashup, of taking two things that seem like they're not related and putting them together in kind of an experiment to see what happens, to follow that curiosity. And I'm excited today to bring to you a conversation that I had with David Ladensohn. And he is an entrepreneur and author. He just wrote the book Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci. And he took these two seemingly unrelated topics and subjects and put them together. And actually, in doing so, he uncovered some things where there actually were some commonalities. And so we talk about his process for writing the book. We talk about just where this idea came from, and just such a great conversation, especially for anyone who maybe is an aspiring writer, author, someone who maybe you're thinking, I don't even know if I'd call myself that. I'm not sure that I can actually do this. Maybe you're plagued with some self-doubt. Well, this episode is really for you in whatever it is that you're creating. I want to invite you to lean in, and just a little warning, we did have some technical difficulties along the way, but we tried to minimize those as best as possible. But I hope that you really enjoy this creative chat that I had with David Ladensohn. Well, David, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks for being here today.
And thank you for having me on the show.
I'm excited to dive into the book that you've written, this concept of fly fishing and Leonardo da Vinci and all the things that go on with that. We're going to get into some details, and it's going to be amazing. But before we go too far down that and get into the specifics of it, I would love to just ask you, like, when you think about your creative abilities, is there something that maybe comes to mind for you that says, like, I remember doing this as a kid that kind of tipped me off that I have some inclination towards creativity?
Two thoughts from early childhood come to mind. I'm not sure even my closest friends have heard these stories, but I'll try to be brief. One is I was born in a town called Temple, Texas, in Central Texas. My dad was in the Army at the time. And I must have liked, as a small child, the alliteration, Temple, Texas, got a ring to it, right? And so I remember as a small child, I think I was 5 years old. We were driving across the country, and I must have made up something. And I think my mother asked me, "Where did you hear that?" And I said, "Well, I heard it on the Temple, Texas radio." And everybody in the car laughed, my older sisters and my parents, and I must have liked that. And so I would begin confabulating, I think is the word, making stuff up. And and either I would say, well, that's what the Temple, Texas radio says, or my parents would say, oh, did you hear that on the Temple, Texas radio? So that was one childhood creativity thing. And then also I had a dear friend, Kim Manning, when I was probably in, let's say, fourth grade, third grade, something like that. And we used to play radio. And we would do what you and I are doing now. We would pretend we had an old radio, and we would, my father must have handed down to me or something, and we would turn the dials, and we would have a radio program. We'd sit facing the same direction, each have some sort of fake microphone. But I would say that childhood inclination toward creativity, I was not artistic. I did not. Well, I wrote some poetry, but it was pretty bad. And I didn't think, honestly, of myself as a creative person, certainly not a creative type, probably until I got into my business career, when I found that you're trying to solve a problem and one solution doesn't work, and you have to think of another solution and another and another. And especially if you have competitors, which everyone does, you're trying to think about, okay, what does this potential client need? How can I come up with a solution that is unique for them? And I would say that's been most of the creativity in my life.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that and specifically said, you didn't feel like you were artistic, but yet you still saw yourself as creative in solving problems and things. And, I get into these conversations with people all the time where the natural reaction for people is like, well, I'm not creative because I can't draw a stick figure, because I can't, fill in the blank. Right.
Right.
And what they're really talking about is artistic. They're not talking about creative.
True.
And so a lot of conversations I have with people, and even on this podcast, are helping people expand their definition of creativity and saying, look, I think we're all creative. It just shows up in different ways. And once we know what that looks like, we can then do it with intention and purpose. And so it sounds like that's exactly what you did in the business context of solving these problems and getting creative, flexing those muscles and thinking, what's possible, and what's the right and best solution for this particular circumstance. Do you think that like practicing that on a regular basis helped in other areas for you creatively? Like, did any of that spill over to any writing that you might have been doing at some point, even if it wasn't like for a project or something specific?
Probably. This may be a little bit roundabout, but every business I've ever been involved with, either as an employee, a manager, an owner, or on a board, or just businesses that my friends have been involved with, you look at what is created. I can't avoid the word. Sort of out of thin air. Now, it takes capital, it takes ideas, it takes talent. But nonetheless, somebody or some group of people are stirring the pot in the kitchen, and the next thing you know, you have a business success. We like to focus on the successes. There are many more failures, and certainly I've had mine. But you look at a successful company or a large company, and so where did that come from? Well, it came from an idea, and it came from some people, and a lot of hard work and a lot of luck, frankly. So how does that relate to the writing? There are certain problems. This is my first book, probably my only book. I've never faced these challenges before in writing, but there's a lot of challenges. You have an idea. How do you get it down on paper? And you read it and you say, oh, that's no good. Let me start over. But I always believed there was a way to solve any given problem. I just had to find it. And it's trial and error, or you A attaches to D, and you say, oh, well, that's a connection that I can make. And so I would say persistence, which I learned in business, and focusing on what the problem is and asking for help. I had an amazing number of people that I would ask for, how do you do this? How do you go about finding a publisher? Things that I would read. I got involved with a person who was a developmental editor, and I had 4 different strands of the story story. I mean, you can tell from the title that it's two very disparate seeming ideas. Well, it turned out to be more, and I had four ideas that I was really having trouble weaving together into one story that might keep a reader turning the pages. And they color coded every paragraph in my text and said, look, you've got too much of Leonardo's life story in the beginning and too much of the fishing in the back and too much of your own quest, I call it, the research to find out more about these drawings that started the book, that started me going on the book. And she showed me that I had not woven them together. They were blocks. And I could say, okay, well, but that's because I think Leonardo's a lot more important than I am. I should be at the back. He should be at the front. She said, no, if you're going to weave it together, you got to weave it together. And this needs to, these four colors need to be better integrated through the book. So I started doing that, and it ended up working. So asking for help is not something that should ever be ignored.
Yeah. And, you make a great point in that someone who has outside lenses to look at your work and give you, critical feedback that you need to make the thing what it needs to be, the best version of it, right? You can't simply just go in a cave and figure that stuff out yourself. And we're so close to our own creations that we have biases and, we have blind spots. And so to have somebody that we invite into the process, the right person, can really make all the difference in that. So I love that you highlighted that in the process part. I want to just back up for a minute and go like, okay, so where did this idea even come from? Because it does seem, like fly fishing, Leonardo da Vinci, how did it even come about?
So that is a moment that I can remember. It's sort of like when lightning struck. I was reading a biography of Leonardo. I love biographies. I love history. I was reading a biography that Walter Isaacson wrote, a very successful biography writer and a successful book. So I was reading it like everybody else a year or two before the 500th anniversary of Leonardo's death in 1518. And I came across an illustration actually on the inside back cover, the end paper. And there's this old man that probably is sort of a self-portrait or caricature of Leonardo, looking at some river currents. And I'm a very avid fly fisherman. I've fly fished for 40 years, 41 seasons now. And you spend a vast amount of time when you're fly fishing looking at the water. We call it reading the water, trying to figure out where a fish would be, particularly trout, where a trout would hold in these river currents, because there are certain places. The aphorism is 90% of the trout are in 10% of the water, and 10% of the anglers catch 90% of the trout. Well, there's a correlation there. If you know how to read the water, you have a lot better chance of catching a fish because there's a fish there. If there's no fish, all the technique in the world will not do it. So it struck me immediately, I know what Leonardo's thinking. He's thinking about what these river currents are doing. And so I kind of went with, it just struck me as, I have many books on reading the water. And wouldn't it be interesting to have a book on reading the water using Leonardo da Vinci drawings instead of contemporary arrows and then, wouldn't it be cool to have contemporary photographs of the same kind of situations that we see on a river that Leonardo drew? Because as more I dove into these drawings, I had to go to many, many, many other books to find them. He was fascinated with river currents, and he wrote extensively about river currents, and he studied what happened below the surface with river currents, hitting obstacles, et cetera. Well, these are all the things that anglers think about, because what's happening in a river, most of it's happening underneath the surface, both the feeding and the obstacles, and affecting the currents where the fish are. So anyway, the idea was simply, first of all, when I saw these drawings, I thought every angler should see these. do they? And I talked to a few who happened to be familiar with art history. None of them knew what I was talking about. And so then I thought, well, everybody should, everybody who fishes should know about these drawings. And I wonder if anybody's written a book on this, because I certainly didn't have the idea of writing a book. Well, nobody had that I'm aware of. And so I thought, well, why not me? Well, because you're not a writer. I said, well, I have a keyboard and I have a pencil. And so I started. And I was so excited about the drawings. I wanted to sort of shout it from the rooftops. Look what Leonardo studied and look what he analyzed. And everybody should be as excited about this as I was. And fast forward 5 years of research and work, and the book's coming out November 5th. And we'll find out whether anybody really is as excited about this as I am.
I love how, you talking about reading the water and stuff. And what came to mind to me also was it's very much like finding your audience, like finding the fish, finding your audience for this. So along those lines, would you say your audience for this book is primarily fly fishermen, or are there things that people can glean from this on another level?
The concept started out as it was going to be a book on reading the water for fly fishermen using Leonardo's drawings. But it changed. It changed and changed. It evolved. The more I read, the more fascinated I got in Leonardo da Vinci, the man. Why was he interested in water? And I thought he was off inventing helicopters or, war machines or painting the Mona Lisa. Well, the more I read about it, the more fascinated I got with the man. And so then I said, okay, well, is this just for fishermen? And it started to morph into, well, a little more about Leonardo and not just about reading the waters. Then it got to be a lot about Leonardo and a bit about the Italian Renaissance, which is a very, very important period in human history that echoes down to our day. And so then it got to be a little bit about history. And then I thought, okay, well, if it's not just for anglers, then I need to explain some things about fly fishing to people who don't fly fish, and make it interesting to somebody who, let's just say, is interested in Leonardo. And yet I didn't want the book to be so basic about fly fishing that it was not interesting to people who already know about fly fishing. So I ended up, and by the way, my middle sister asked me over and over, who's this book for? And it's a very important question that publishers ask. They say, what book on the shelf is your book going to be next to in a bookstore? You have to know your audience. And so I ended up, the book, I began to write more and more saying, well, what's a general audience? Who is interested in Leonardo and maybe not interested in fishing? Who's interested in fishing but doesn't really know about Leonardo and these drawings? So it was written for both of those audiences. And then I said, well, can I make it interesting enough that someone who is interested in history and doesn't know that much about Leonardo, or interested in Leonardo but doesn't know anything about fishing, or interested in fishing but doesn't know about the other two, is willing to turn the page? So that was my test as I put it together and as I wrote it, is can this be interesting to the general reader? And that, again, we'll have to see. I hope so. The people who have read it have been very encouraging to me that, yeah, this is interesting. I kept it short. I used to joke, and my apologies to all anglers out there, that when I was originally just writing for anglers, I said, well, it has to be short chapters, big print, and lots of pictures, because, how bright can we really be that we run around chasing, fish all day? It's a little like chasing the white ball around the golf course, right? So it's not dumbed down, but it is brief. And my goal is to hold the attention and the interest of people who are not, who don't read a bunch of fishing books or don't read a bunch of Leonardo books, but will find the stories, the four strands that I mentioned, interesting enough. And I have tried to go from chapter to chapter. You're moving. So if you start to yawn at one chapter, you don't have to read far before I switch gears to a different story.
Yeah. And I think there's some wisdom there too, because the day and age we live in, attention spans are just shorter and shorter. And so giving people access to get in and engage with content, and then, have this ability to kind of jump in and jump out as their schedules and interests, allow, I think is a smart thing to do. I'm sure that probably took a long time to distill down, because I know it's hard to be succinct and brief. You have to have a lot and then whittle down to something. People think, just, fill whatever, this amount of time and it's easy. And it's like, no. There's all the things that have to happen before that point. Is that your experience?
Well, it's very true. And most of the biographies that I read in researching this book of Leonardo run 400 to 600 pages. And my thinking is that unless you're a dedicated biography reader, you probably don't want to read 400 to 600 pages about anybody. And I came across two books published. One was in the 1890s, one was in the 1900s, about Leonardo. They were biographies of Leonardo, and each one was under 120 pages. And I read them with great interest, and they were great. And they didn't tell every move that he made from city to city. They didn't tell what he had for breakfast every morning, which a lot of the biographies I like do. But again, to write for a general reader, I thought, okay, well, if my book is 200 pages and a third of its biography, or maybe so 60 or 70 pages of Leonardo is, I believe, as much as most people will want to know. If they want to know more, there are over 500 books written on Leonardo da Vinci. So wow. If I tease them into saying they want to read more about Leonardo, there are a lot of very good biographies. But that's not what I set out to do. And so to your question, and as you see, I don't do short answers. And so for me, paring down and editing was a monumental task. And part of it is just trying to improve the writing and get the paragraphs right, the sentences right, without a lot of superfluous language. But part of it is, and this is the painful part, I think some famous writer said, kill your babies. Mm-hmm. It's a horrible phrase, but it's like you have to take whole chapters and say, yes, this is interesting to me, but it's not important enough to the story to keep it in. Out it goes. So I had 61 chapters, and I ended up with 24. Oh, wow. And that was painful. But again, I hope that more people will want to turn 200 pages than maybe if I had written 500.
Yeah. So often, too, the work that we do that doesn't make the light of day is important because even for us, it's a bridge for ideas sometimes, or for other information, or for expressing something that we're eventually going to get to, but we need to pass through that portion, right? I mean, was that your...
So yeah, absolutely. So one quick story there is that I wrote a story that I thought was humorous, which my wife, my most critical reader and had read the most drafts, said, that's not funny. Well, that actually is my biggest fear, is that my attempts at humor if people will shake their head and say, no, that's not funny. That would be awful. But I had one fictional chapter in the book, and it was a story about Leonardo and his many half brothers and sisters going out fishing. So it was, I thought, very clear that I was imagining what it might have been like for him as a child, not a fly fisherman, but going out as a little kid and trying to catch fish. And I wrote this whole thing, and somebody who read a draft said, "Is this true?" And I was horrified because I tried very hard to both be honest in what I'm passing along, and if it's something I think or believe based on what I've read, to say it might have happened this way, or it's conceivable, or it probably did. That's a lot different than an academic historian who really needs, let's say, three hard primary sources that intersect, and they can say this is the way it was. And so I wrote this chapter when the person said to me, "Is this true?" I was like, "Okay, I can't do this." So I took this whole fictional story that I thought was amusing, tossed it out, and replaced it with a research. That's my long-winded answer to your question, which is, was that process valuable? That winnowing down process, and I think it was.
So the next question I'd like to ask you is, so if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, hey, I would really like to write a book. I would really like to get my ideas out in that form. But they're thinking, I'm not really a writer, or they have all these objections internally. What would you say to them in this moment?
I would say, do you care enough about the subject to just deal with the difficulty of finding a publisher and or an agent, the fact that you're not a natural writer, whatever. I think it takes zeal to finish writing a book. This is nothing I ever set out to do. As I said, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. Look at these amazing drawings that Leonardo da Vinci did. Oh, and let me tell you something about fly fishing. And Leonardo is a remarkably interesting person. I wanted to get that story out to people more than I was self-conscious about my writing ability or finding a publisher or going on too long or anything else. So I would say the most important thing is, do you really want to write this book? If so, go do it. There are plenty of writing clinics. There are plenty of books on writing that can help you. There's a comment that John McPhee, a real favorite nonfiction writer of mine, made, which is, you can cut anything. He challenges his writing students to take 7 words out of the Gettysburg Address, which is about the most concise, beautiful composition that anyone ever wrote in Abraham Lincoln. And he says, improve it, take 7 words out somehow. Mm-hmm. And so my point is, there are classes, there are books, there are online sites. You can always improve your writing. I think keep sustaining the energy and having the tremendous desire to get whatever it is you have to say out to people who might benefit from it or enjoy it is the most important factor.
Yeah. It calls to mind for me. I remember somebody saying something to me about, like, when you're in that place and you're blocked by fear and you have all this self-doubt blocking you from actually showing up and creating the thing, getting it out into the world, your eyes are on yourself. And it's a very selfish place to be, because you're not allowing what needs to be created and to get out into the world to flow through you. And that's actually a disservice to other people. And so when you start thinking about it in those terms, and not just like, oh, well, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if maybe it's too hard, those kind of things, that's all so much self-focused. And when we get our eyes off of us and get it onto the people who can actually benefit from what we create, that can be a tremendous thing,
That's a beautiful thought. I've never heard that before. I like that a lot. Yes, if you want to write a book that's good enough for anybody to read it, then that's a service to humanity. So Go out there and do your part. Also, I do believe that I'm getting a bit philosophical here, but I do believe that people do harder things. I mean, hold a job,
Mm-hmm.
deal with the loss of a job, taking care of a parent, raising a child. These are really hard things. And most of us have done those things. And it's just, we have to, right? That's part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be easy to say, well, this, nobody will ever know if I quit writing this book. And so your story of, well, think of all those people who might benefit from it. So sit down and write it. It's not as hard as a lot of other things that we actually do in life because we know we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something about when you, not just writing a book, but really when you set out to do something like that, create something, and you move through the process and you come through the other side, you prove to yourself, I can do this. And then there's almost a sense of, well, what else can I do? Right? Like it's contagious, right? I mean, do you have that feeling?
Yes. Yes. Well, that's true. Well, I do because it turns out it's not the end of the process, but at least I'm at the end of the process of writing and the book's being printed now. So it's a very gratifying moment. And then the next stage is, okay, and try to let people who might know about it, people who might enjoy it, know that it exists, which is obviously the reason I'm so honored to be on your podcast, to reach your listeners. And I will go speak to people who are interested in Italian culture and people who are interested in fly fishing, and some general audiences. So there's the promotional element, which is a whole other task.
Oh,
but yes, I have a great feeling of accomplishment in seeing it in print.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's an idea, and it is. I'm not handy in the way of making doing carpentry projects and stuff. But if you have an idea and then it becomes something tangible, that's a very wonderful feeling. As is thinking, I think I know there's a fish in there, and I think that I can make the right cast. And you make the cast, and the fish takes the fly, and you catch him or her, and you release her for another day. That's taking a concept and making it very tangible also.
Yeah, yeah. I want to plant a seed for a sequel to the book. I think you should do fly fishing with Leonardo DiCaprio and then see where that takes you.
Well, it turns out, I believe that Leonardo DiCaprio actually is a fly fisherman.
Oh, and, look at that.
I don't have his cell number, and he doesn't know that I'm around, but that would be lovely. I'm sure he's a delightful person. I don't know.
Well, Leo, if you're listening, give a little buzz, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, David, well, thank you so much for sharing about your process, about the book, your ideas, your curiosity. I love diving into this and getting a fuller picture beyond what just the creation is, and to see, who is the creator behind this. And can you just tell us a little bit about, where can people find the book? Where can they find you? How can they follow along? All the links and things, lay some of that on us right now.
So the book is called Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci. You can find it online from any of the online sellers. You can find it in your local retail bookstore, independent bookseller. I hope, ask them, they can get it for you. I have a website called Fly Fish Leonardo, all one word, Fly Fish Leonardo. If you put that in, it comes up with some illustrations of what I've been talking about, some of Leonardo's drawings, a few of them, and a little profile of the book, and a big button that says, buy now or pre-order now, and it will take you to Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, or Trinity University Press. You can click on any of those that you would like to buy from, and it will ship November 5th. Also, I've got an email link there that if you have any comments for me, any suggestions, just want to chat about anything, fly fishing or Leonardo, I would be happy to hear from you. So that's Fly Fish Leonardo is kind of the one-stop shopping place for information about the book. Me, you can get to Trinity Press or any of the booksellers.
I can't wait to hear more about the success of your book once it launches, and just see, no pun intended here, but the ripple effect that happens as it goes out.
I like it. Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Absolutely, David. My pleasure. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.